Foundation and Dr. Sri Harsha for giving me this opportunity. I'm a neurologist. I practice at in a neurology clinic at Dubai. So I will start my presentation. The disclaimer is I have nothing to disclose. I have taken informed consent from the patients, and I'm sharing my personal experience. And the learning objective today is I'm going to present cases of hemodynamic dizziness. And at the end, I will mention few interesting facts about the positional and positioning causes of vestibular symptoms. So now coming to the dizziness or vertigo, we know that there are vestibular disorders. If we look at them, the etiology of the disorders which can cause to dizziness or vertigo or whatever types of different types of symptoms. It could be either vestibular in origin, or it could be functional, or it could be a psychiatric in origin, or it could be hemodynamic, and there are other causes for this dizziness or vertigo. So commonly we discuss the vestibular causes. We commonly discuss the vestibular causes. Functional causes we have discussed in one of my talk. One of the vertigo talk was dedicated to for the psychiatric etiology, and we will discuss the other causes in subsequently. So these are the non-hemodynamic causes. If we classify the causes of the dizziness, we can classify it into hemodynamic causes and non-hemodynamic causes of dizziness. So if we look at the hemodynamic causes, they can cause global cerebral hypoperfusion. It's a common condition. It can lead to dizziness. And the presentation is diverse because there are diverse etiologies which can lead to dizziness. And the sensitivity and specificity of the diagnostic test is unsatisfactory, that I will elaborate later on. So this is how we classify the patients into of dizziness or vertigo, those who have hemodynamic causes and non-hemodynamic causes. Okay. So non-hemodynamic causes we commonly discuss in various forums, but these hemodynamic causes are not commonly discussed. So that's why I thought I'll present this particular vertigo talk episode is dedicated to the hemodynamic causes. Okay, so let's go ahead. So if we look at the hemodynamic causes, there are hemodynamic causes can be divided into two types. One is cardiogenic syncope, like non-orthostatic, means those disorders, hemodynamic disorders, not related to the posture. It can cause dizziness in any position, like even in supine position. That is cardiogenic syncope, and that the hemodynamic causes could be related, could be orthostatic primarily, like it can be because of only orthostasis, that is reflex syncope, orthostatic hypotension, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and dizziness and vertigo related to the other cardiac problems. So the reflex syncope, orthostatic hypotension, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, that is POTS, and dizziness vertigo due to other cardiac problems. So the hemodynamic causes can be divided into non-orthostatic and orthostatic. Okay. So then comes the non-hemodynamic causes, that is normally which we discuss in various forums, that is non-hemodynamic causes, vestibular causes. Those causes also can be divided into orthostatic and non-orthostatic, because there are some vestibular neurologic causes which can particularly happen in standing position. For example, case of triple PD, it happens mostly in the it gets triggered mainly by orthostasis, that is posture. Upright posture is one of the trigger for triple PD. So similarly, there are certain neurologic causes and other causes which can specifically happen during the orthostasis. So the non-hemodynamic causes are divided into orthostatic and non-orthostatic causes. So, today's discussion mainly I'm restricting to the orthostatic causes of dizziness. In this particular episode, I will talk mainly about this group, this group I'm going to talk, and subsequent episode we will next episode maybe I will cover the orthostatic causes which are non-hemodynamic. Today I will cover the hemodynamic causes of orthostatic dizziness. Okay, so let's go ahead. So let me see anything coming up in the chat box. I'm not able to see the chat box. I'll just see it. Nothing. So I hope everything is going well, the video, audio. Okay. So let us go ahead. Yeah. So today I'm restricting to this or hemodynamic orthostatic causes, and Uh, so orthostatic dizziness basically could be either hemodynamic or non-hemodynamic. So it's very important to obtain a proper history, that whenever a patient tells history, that when the patient gets up from sitting or lying down position, or in upright posture if they are developing symptoms, though, so we need to differentiate whether the patient has hemodynamic cause or non-hemodynamic cause. And in those patients, it's very important to conduct some part of examination, that is orthostatic blood pressure measurement and heart rate measurement. So one point which can differentiate between hemodynamic and non-hemodynamic causes of dizziness is it can be the hemodynamic orthostatic dizziness can be followed by a syncopal attack, which the non-hemodynamic orthostatic causes, it is not followed by a loss of consciousness. But it's not mandatory. Many a times the hemodynamic orthostatic dizziness, the various causes, it may be just pre-syncopal symptoms, like patients can have just blackout, lightheadedness, and orthostatic intolerance. Prolonged standing can trigger the orthostatic in this dizziness. And but that is a point to differentiate. If it is followed by a loss of consciousness, it becomes easy to diagnose. Now coming to little review of literature about this orthostatic dizziness. Orthostasis is a Greek term. It means upright posture, and dizziness or vertigo, which is happening on standing up, is nothing but orthostatic dizziness, and it's a common symptom. And Barani Society came up with a diagnostic criteria for hemodynamic orthostatic dizziness uh, in 2019, and it's a very important document. I recommend everyone to go through this particular diagnostic criteria, because it's very it explains everything about how the orthostatic dizziness can present, what are the hemodynamic causes and non-hemodynamic causes. Now coming to this orthostatic dizziness, vertigo, it can happen present in upright position only, or more specifically, it develops on rising from a sitting to a standing position, or from lying to a sitting or standing position. I'm going to demonstrate that, and not considered if symptoms happen in supine position. Uh, sitting to standing position, if a patient is feeling dizziness from sitting to standing position, then it can be called as orthostatic dizziness. And the second possibility, like second thing, is it can also happen from lying down to sitting position, like if a patient is sitting up from the lying down position. And next is, so the it can happen from like lying down to sitting, like even standing, like many it can happen, this orthostatic dizziness. Now next is 1 second. And orthostatic dizziness happens in upright posture when we stand up for a long time. Like some patients are prone to develop this dizziness, orthostatic dizziness. So coming to this hemodynamic orthostatic dizziness, it is a less popular term amongst neurotologists. Why? Because of presence of systemic features, and the pathophysiology and treatment differs from vestibular disorders. It is not something which is like we can say in vestibular disorders. It has a definite set of diagnostic criteria and definite features, vestibular lab testing, and we are very much well versed with the treating the patient or diagnosing the patients with vestibular disorders. But when it comes to the hemodynamic orthostatic causes, it's very important to create awareness about this particular group of disorders. And so in 29th Barani Society meeting in 2016, there was a subcommittee which was formed for this orthostatic dizziness, and which came up with the criteria in 2019. And the diagnostic criteria for hemodynamic orthostatic dizziness is nothing but one or more episodes of dizziness or vertigo or unsteadiness triggered by arising or present during upright position and which subsides by sitting or lying down. And orthostatic hypotension, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or syncope documented on standing or during head up tilt testing. So it's very important to conduct these two parts of examination, that is head up tilt test. If it is available, it should be done, and this orthostatic blood pressure measurement should be carried out and not better accounted by any other disorder. So previously used term for this condition are orthostatic postural dizziness or vertigo, uh, exertional dizziness or vertigo, presyncopal dizziness. But we should use specifically the term hemodynamic orthostatic dizziness if we are dealing with a hemodynamic cause of orthostatic symptoms. So that is consensus regarding this particular disorder. And usually the symptoms of hemodynamic orthostatic dizziness are non-spinning dizziness, lightheadedness, blackout, faint. Orthostatic vertigo can also happen. I'm going to explain why some patients feel vertigo instead of feeling only blackout. That mechanism I'm going to explain. And usually these patients don't have positional vertigo, oscillopsia, spontaneous episodic imbalance. That is not usually a feature. Now, coming to causes of hemodynamic orthostatic dizziness, there are four important causes: orthostatic hypotension, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, syncope, and dizziness and vertigo due to cardiac problems. Okay. So it's very important to do this orthostatic blood pressure and heart rate measurement as a screening test. So how it should be carried out? There are some guidelines for that. First thing is in office setup. What we should do is patient should be. What I have started doing is I ask the patient to lie down for at least 5 minutes before doing it, and then we can give the orthostatic challenge. So orthostatic challenge can be given in the form of in the clinic setting, we can ask the patient to stand for 3 to 10 minutes. I do it for 5 minutes. Initially, I used to do it for 3 minutes, but now I have increased it to the 5 minute. But it can be increased to 10 minutes because that is more appropriate. But that is usually done during the head up tilt testing. Ideally, head up tilt testing is the best way to diagnose these type of disorders, but head up tilt testing is not easily available in many settings. So it's important to in the clinic setup. What we can do is we can ask the patient to stand for 5 minutes at least, 3 to 5 minutes. Then we have to check the blood pressure and pulse. If after standing there is drop in blood pressure of more than 20 millimeters of mercury in the systolic, or diastolic more than or equal to 10 millimeters, uh, associated with compensatory rise in heart rate, then it is non-neurogenic orthostatic hypotension. If there is not much rise in heart rate, it is neurogenic orthostatic hypotension. And suppose we give this orthostatic challenge and blood pressure remains normal, but there is increase in the heart rate, like the heart rate, baseline heart rate goes more than 120 beats per minute, or it is the heart rate rises more than 30 minutes per minute from the baseline, then it is called as postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And if there is a fall in blood pressure during the head-up tilt testing with associated fall in heart rate, then it is neurocardiogenic syncope. So these are the important diagnoses to be considered in patients with orthostatic dizziness. Okay. Now, this is this is me in 2005, and my thesis topic was like evaluation of neurocardiogenic syncope with the use of tilt-table test. And in 2000, from 2005 to 2007, during my residency in internal medicine, I did 209 tilt-table tests, and we found neurocardiogenic syncope in 77 patients out of these patients, and 16 patients had situational type of syncope and seizure disorder. So it is very important to see that this tilt table testing is a very important test in which the table is tilted to 40 the angulation is 70 degree, and we have to continuously monitor the blood pressure and heart rate. Like every 3 minutes, we used to monitor this blood pressure and heart rate. And as soon as we notice the symptoms or drop in blood pressure or drop in heart rate, we have to immediately lower the patient down. That is a positive tilt table test, and it is indicative of there are various patterns which are seen in tilt table testing, and which helps to diagnose these disorders. And many a times what happens is the patients with neurocardiogenic syncope are unfortunately they get treatment as like a seizure disorder. Many a times they get treated with anti-epileptic drugs, and we could diagnose those cases, and we could stop the anti-epileptic drugs and start them on treatment for neurocardiogenic syncope. And there were other causes also of the orthostatic dizziness, and there were other findings in the study. Now, uh, yeah, coming to cases, this was just to give a brief idea about today's theme. Now coming to the first case, 25-year gentleman, his symptoms were like blackout, sweating. He had a warm sensation feeling, and it was even associated with some spinning sensation. And this group of symptoms, it was followed by loss of consciousness, and which was for 3 to 4 minutes. And the trigger for the this particular episode was prolonged standing. So he had a history of two similar episodes in the past. 3 years ago, he had one episode after micturition in the washroom. That is very common history in patients with syncope. And 2 years ago, he had his similar history while giving the blood sample. So it's a very common condition, and this particular like neurocardiogenic syncope or neurally mediated syncope or neurocardiogenic syncope or vasovagal syncope. These are the so syncope and these both are not same. Syncope and neurocardiogenic syncope is a type of syncope, and syncope can be because of various causes. So one of them is neurocardiogenic syncope or neurally mediated syncope. So the tilt table test, what it shows in patients with this particular entity is the systolic blood pressure after the patient is initially supine, and then we tilt the table to 70 degrees. And once the table is tilted and it is maintained for 45 minutes, 45 minutes the table is maintained in 70 degree. And it's not that like patients get this particular drop in blood pressure immediately. If it happens within 10 minutes, then it is orthostatic hypotension if there is associated tachycardia. But if the patients get associated bradycardia and fall in blood pressure, which can be any time in this 45 minute, then it is a neurocardiogenic syncope. And so you can see here there was drop in heart rate, and there was drop in systolic and diastolic blood pressure after a period of standing, maybe at like later on, like maybe it is after 30 minutes. But it can happen anytime. It can happen early also, it can happen late also in that 45-minute period. But it's very important to observe the heart rate. If there is rise in heart rate and followed by sudden bradycardia, then it is neurocardiogenic syncope. But if there is a sustained rise in heart rate, then it goes in favor of orthostatic hypotension. And if there is no compensatory rise in heart rate, then it goes in favor of neurogenic orthostatic hypotension, which is associated with fall in blood pressure. So vasovagal syncope or neurocardiogenic syncope, these are basically it is a very common disorder, and it is caused by an autonomic reflex which involves cessation of sympathetic vascular tone and vagal activation, and which is associated with drop in blood pressure and drop in the heart rate. So that is diagnostic of neurocardiogenic syncope, and it is seen more commonly in young age group patients, and orthostatic hypotension usually seen in elderly. So these are the common provoking agents. One is prolonged standing, situational stimuli like cough syncope, micturition, defecation. Venipuncture is a very common cause of neurocardiogenic syncope. Sight of blood. You might have like seen many patients while giving the blood samples. They get the syncopal attack. So it's very important that when they are giving the sample, it's very important to like those staff who are regularly taking the sample, it's very important to educate them that to make the patient flat immediately and raise the legs. Like this is a very important measure which can help to prevent further worsening of syncope. Sometimes the patients can even get jerks, like tonic-clonic movements of upper limbs and lower limbs because of prolonged syncope. So it's very important that we should train the staff who are dealing with like venipuncture. Unpleasant smell can lead to syncopal attack, and severe pain also is one of the trigger. The prodromal symptoms of syncope are pallor, sweating, nausea, abdominal discomfort, yawning, sighing, and hyperventilation. And one very important point to differentiate it from drop attack or the seizure episode is usually these prodromal symptoms happen for some time, and slowly the patient falls. Like it is not all of a sudden without any warning. If it is happening, then it is a drop attack or a seizure. But if it happens with prodromal symptoms and subacutely, the patient doesn't fall suddenly. They fall, but they get some premonitory symptoms, and if they don't lie down immediately, then they get full-blown attack. Like then they fall, and once the in the standing position, what happens is the heart is beating against the gravity. But when the patients fall and they in the lying down position, whatever ineffective contractions of the heart, it is still able to perfuse the brain, and then that's how they regain consciousness. Now, coming to the treatment of neurocardiogenic syncope, it's very important to educate the patient regarding avoidance of triggers, which I have mentioned in my earlier slide. Then identify warning symptoms. As soon as they notice the warning symptoms, it's very important to lie down wherever they are. Leg crossing, then there are certain maneuvers like leg crossing and or lower body muscle tensing. These are the maneuvers which will help them to increase the venous return. Another important maneuver is lay down supine with ask someone to elevate the legs, or the other people should be aware about this particular maneuver. If somebody gets a syncopal attack, they should immediately make the patient flat and raise the legs. That is a very important maneuver to be done. Many a times the patients are in sitting position. People try to throw some water on the face. It should not be done, and immediately it's very important to make the patient flat and raise the legs. That will increase the venous return to the heart, and patients can regain the consciousness. Then increase dietary salt intake and electrolyte solution. Then orthostatic training program. There is one exercise called as still training exercise. Patient has to stand against the wall, like for slowly patient can increase from 5 minutes to 30 minutes, and they should stand at one place, and that will increase the orthostatic tolerance, and it is one of the recommended thing for patients with neurocardiogenic syncope. And drugs like beta blockers, midodrine, fludrocortisone can be given. And some patients have high risk of getting recurrent attacks, and those especially who have cardioinhibitory syncope, and those who get head injury because of syncopal attacks. In those cases, there are certain indication specific subset of patients who need cardiac pacing. But by and large, neurocardiogenic syncope is not life threatening, unless the patients, in some patients it can be life threatening, but usually over a period of time it is a self-limiting illness, and as the age increases, the patients can get less number of episodes. Coming to case number 2, 45-year gentleman, 3 episodes of loss of consciousness. Duration of loss of consciousness was in minutes, and every time it happens in washroom after defecation. He had 3 episodes, and all 3 happened after defecation. And so there is one entity called as defecation syncope, and it is a type of situational syncope. Like, for example, just now we have seen a vasovagal type of syncope out of the reflex syncope. This situational syncope, it can be like cough induced. I have one patient with cough induced syncope, and another this particular just now I told is a defecation syncope. And there are various like swallow syncope and various procedures when we are performing in ophthalmology, pulmonology, or GI. Patients can get syncopal attacks. Okay, and it's very important to be aware about this particular entity like situational syncope. Now coming to the other causes of syncopal attacks, that is cardiac causes. See, neurocardiogenic syncope or reflex syncope, it is a diagnosis of exclusion. It's very important to rule out arrhythmias and structural heart diseases. That's why for arrhythmia, it's very important to do ECG and Holter monitoring in these patients. And structural heart diseases should be ruled out. Like, it's very important to take consultation in patients with syncope with a cardiologist, and they can evaluate the patient with this test like ECG, Holter monitoring, and 2D echo to rule out these structural heart diseases also. So coming to the various in my career during my residency in medicine or neurology, we have seen cases of recurrent syncopal attack. One was due to Brugada syndrome. There are various causes of syncopal attacks, like various cardiac arrhythmias. Then coming to another case, elderly lady came with history of repeated episodes of vertigo. And I was a neurology resident like in 2019, and I was surprised to see that patient, she presented with episodes of vertigo, but she had a new onset complete heart block. When we did ECG and compared with her previous ECG, she had a new onset complete heart block. And the mechanism for vertigo in patients with hemodynamic causes, I will explain now. So basically, if we look at the cerebral circulation, like the circulation to the brain is maintained through 4 major arteries, 2 carotids from the front and 2 vertebrals from behind. So what happens is, if the patient, usually the anterior circulation, what happens is anterior circulation gives the retinal artery and it supplies the retina. So whenever there is hypoperfusion, so the blackout happens because the anterior, there is ischemia of the retina because of this ophthalmic artery, and it leads to the blackout. That is a very common cause of common symptom of hemodynamic dizziness. But if the at the same time there is a less circulation in the vertebral arteries also, and vertebral artery supplies the posterior circulation, and uh, if the vertebral circulation is symmetric, like it is supplying both the sided vestibular systems in a symmetric and equal fashion, then it will not lead to vertigo. It might cause unsteadiness. But if there is any hypoperfusion in one sided vestibular system as compared to the other, then only it can lead to vertigo in patients with hemodynamic dizziness. So anterior circulation hypoperfusion causes syncopal dizziness and blackout, and posterior circulation hypoperfusion can lead to brainstem and cerebellar hypoperfusion. If it is asymmetric, then it can cause vertigo, and it can still lead to syncopal dizziness by causing hypoperfusion of the occipital lobes. Then there are other causes like long QT syndrome, supraventricular tachycardia. It can lead to the syncopal dizziness and orthostatic dizziness. Now coming to the case number 3, 45-year gentleman, history of right-sided neck pain. This gentleman had right-sided neck pain, and he was trying to give massage to this muscle. He was having severe pain on the right side, and while massaging, he had a blackout, and it was followed by a transient episode of loss of consciousness. And then he presented to me and then this is the video. It is self कर दीजिए एक मिनट So he was trying to massage his right side of the neck, and you can see the heart rate went down when he was touching the right side of the neck. You can see the heart rate was around, I will show you. So the heart rate initially was 77, and it went down to 38, 34 when he was doing massage to the right sided on the right sided neck area. So he was a patient of carotid sinus hypersensitivity. So it's very important to know about this group of disorders, and slideshow is not visible. 1 second. Okay. Is it visible now? Is my slide visible? Can anybody put in chat box? Mr. Thimaya, Dr. Thimaya has written slideshow is not visible. Is it visible now? It's visible. Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, so syncope, when we evaluate patients with syncope, what happens, we have to recognize the alarming symptoms like sudden episode without preceding symptom. If there are no preceding symptoms, then it doesn't go in favor of vasovagal syncope. And if there is history of heart disease or history of sudden death in family, that goes in favor of prolonged QT syndrome or hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy, or syncope is associated with chest pain, seizure disorder, syncope with weakness and or speech problems. So these are the high risk things. And if there are no alarming symptoms, then and the patient is young, and there are typical features of vasovagal syncope like extreme pain or sight of blood, then suspect cardiac causes and do these particular studies. The cardiologist will go ahead with these studies to rule out important causes. And from neurology side, EEG and brain scan can be done. In the next episode, I will present some cases, 2-3 cases where it mimicked like a syncopal attack, but it turned out to be something else. So it's very important to do imaging and EEG. Then it's very important to check the orthostatic blood pressure measurements to diagnose the or rule out orthostatic hypotension. And reflex mediated syncope can be diagnosed by tilt table test. Is a very important test. Unfortunately, it's not widely available, and it's a very important test to be done in patients with orthostatic dizziness. And carotid sinus massage in controlled settings should be done to diagnose carotid sinus hypersensitivity. And patients who have unexplained recurrent syncope, they should undergo implantable loop monitor, electrophysiology study, endocrine evaluation, and if everything is ruled out, then psychiatric evaluation. Because conversion disorder can also lead to recurrent loss of consciousness. Now coming to the case number 4, 72-year gentleman, history of giddiness from 5 years. The episode were short lasting for seconds, and the trigger for the episodes were getting up from supine position, exertion, and climbing upstairs. So there were 3 triggers. One is getting up from supine position and exertion and climbing upstairs. And he was known hypertensive from 10 years, and he was on candesartan 8 milligram, as well as he was having benign prostatic hyperplasia like BPH, and he was on alfuzosin, which is alpha blocker, and dutasteroid, which is another drug for this benign prostatic hyperplasia. Then his blood pressure, I checked. What mistake I did in him is I checked only the blood pressure till 3 minutes standing. So then when I gave a talk on this orthostatic dizziness, and I was reviewing the literature, I came to know that it should be checked up to 10 minutes to completely rule out orthostatic hypotension. It's very important to check up to 10 minutes, because the orthostatic hypotension is divided into 2 types. One is early orthostatic hypotension and late delayed orthostatic hypotension. So patients can develop this orthostatic hypotension as late as up to 10 minutes also. So the longer we check is important for the diagnosis. Then I went into the literature, and I found that like all these 3 drugs, like alfuzosin, which is alpha blocker, candesartan, and dutasteroid, all of them can cause dizziness. 6% patients with alfuzosin, they can feel dizziness, 4% in candesartan, and 1% in dutasteroid. And see, there are 2 types of dizziness that drugs can cause. One is because of the class effect. Class effect means, for example, a patient who is on anti-epileptic drugs can have dizziness, but it is not related to the hemodynamic dizziness. Like the class effect can lead to the dizziness, but the hemodynamic dizziness can be caused by some medications like which reduce the blood pressure, like for example antihypertensive drugs. They can cause drug induced dizziness because of hypotension, and some drugs can, irrespective of the hypotension, they can, because of the effect on the central nervous system, the vestibular pathways, they can lead to the dizziness. So management of this group of patient, this particular patient was, I referred him to urologist, and who stopped the alfuzosin. I stopped candesartan and started him on bisoprolol, and the patient had improvement in the dizziness. But what I learned from this particular patient is it's very important to check if we are clinically suspecting orthostatic hypotension. It's very important to check for up to 10 minutes if time permits. And 5 minute patient should undergo 5 minutes supine rest. Then patient should stand for from 2 to 10 minutes ideally, but up to 5 minutes is also can be done. And if there is more than 20 millimeters fall in systolic blood pressure, or more than 10 or equal to fall in diastolic blood pressure, plus or minus, the symptoms may or may not happen along with the fall in blood pressure, and that qualifies as orthostatic hypotension. Now coming to this orthostatic hypotension is the most common cause, and not only the only cause. It is not the only cause of this orthostatic dizziness. And orthostatic hypotension is a disorder, and there are various causes like primary autonomic failure, secondary autonomic failure, postprandial hypotension, iatrogenic or drug-induced hypotension, and volume depletion. So this is the most common cause of orthostatic hypotension. Of course, we do see patients with Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia and multisystem atrophy. They can have this particular complication, that is autonomic failure, and it can lead to orthostatic hypotension. Now coming to, as I was mentioning about, there are two types of orthostatic hypotension. One is initial and another is delayed. So in initial, as soon as the patient is taken up, here the patient is in supine position, the blood pressure and the heart rate was well maintained. As soon as the patient was taken in for the head up tilt test, or as soon as the patient stands up, the patient developed drop in heart rate, drop in systolic blood pressure, a drop in the diastolic pressure, and there was compensatory increase in the heart rate. So if there was compensatory increase, that differentiate it from the neurocardiogenic syncope, and there within 15 seconds of standing, the patient had this fall in blood pressure with compensatory rise in heart rate. And the delayed orthostatic hypotension is nothing but once we take the patient up, like either the patient stands up or we give the head up tilt, and there is a delayed drop in blood pressure like systolic and diastolic up to 10 minutes. That is delayed orthostatic hypotension. That is after 3 minutes of standing. So usually if we check only up to 3 minutes, we might miss some cases which can develop orthostatic hypotension later on in 3 to 10 minutes. And these patients have milder abnormalities of sympathetic adrenergic function, and it is a frequent cause of orthostatic dizziness. And neurogenic orthostatic hypotension is because of sympathetic adrenergic failure. There is no compensatory tachycardia in this group of patients. And non-neurogenic orthostatic hypotension, there is compensatory tachycardia. You can see the green line, there is a compensatory tachycardia. Now coming to case number 5, 66 years female, imbalance, continuous lightheadedness with momentary flares. She wakes up from sleep with these symptoms, and turning to either side triggers her symptom, and while watching TV sometimes, and more in the night time and not in the daytime. And this case actually I presented last time. She had a COVID infection, and after the COVID infection, she developed these symptoms. And we had a discussion about her PHQ-9, and this was normal. And this positional testing revealed right posterior canal BPPV, but I did a please maneuver, and she was not improving despite the improvement in her spinning. There was no improvement in her lightheadedness. And then I thought of she was visiting me third time, and her dizziness was not improving. Then I did her orthostatic blood pressure measurements, and I found that her heart rate was very high. It was going from 77 baseline to 103, 105, 105 and it was sustained rise in the heart rate was seen. So this is one of my observation, like in 2 patients post COVID, I have seen that they have developed this lightheadedness, and there was postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And so these patients have this sustained rise in heart rate after standing without drop in blood pressure, systolic or diastolic. So so the diagnostic criteria is sustained increase in heart rate more than 30 beats per minute, and the heart rate can go above more than 120, and it is within 10 minutes of standing or head up tilt test, and there is no drop in blood pressure. That is how it differs itself from the orthostatic hypotension. It is a common cause of orthostatic dizziness, and age of presentation is 15 to 50. Females are more commonly affected, and these are the pathogenesis. This is the pathogenesis, and these are the common causes: chronic bed rest, hypovolemia, dehydration, and hyperadrenergic state, like because of psychological factor, anxiety, it can provoke this postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And in her fourth visit, her BP readings improved, like heart rate improved. And this was a very important symptom. Her symptoms were more in the night time. I will explain why she had more nighttime symptoms. So she had history of COVID infection, she had BPPV, she had postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and I will explain the symptoms in a while, why she had more nighttime symptoms. It is a very peculiar feature which can be seen in patients with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Another patient, young male, lightheadedness, palpitations, fading of vision on getting up from sitting or supine position, which was lasting for a few seconds. And this is his video. So you just look at the heart rate when, for example, when he was supine, the patient is currently supine and the heart rate was 85. And then when I asked the patient to stand up, the heart rate went up to, we will see. So the heart rate went up to the 124 from reading of 85, it went up to the 125. And there was no corresponding drop in blood pressure. We checked the blood pressure and we asked the patient here whether the patient was feeling dizzy, and he reported presence of dizziness when the heart rate was high. So it is a case of postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and I have explained about this. So coming to, yeah. So treatment of postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, increase the fluid and salt intake, regular exercise regimen, avoid prolonged bed rest is very important. Even though they get symptoms in orthostasis, it's very important to tell them to not to go for complete bed rest. It can worsen the problem. And there are certain drugs which can be used like beta blockers, midodrine, fludrocortisone, ivabradine, and it's very important to treat their underlying anxiety, because underlying anxiety is one of the cause of aggravation of symptoms, and in resistant cases compressive garments can help. Now coming to another part of my today's talk, that is postures and vestibular disorders. uh, so I will just tell some interesting things, like there is a common debate whether the vertigo and nystagmus, whether to use the terminology positional versus positioning. Positional means, exact meaning of positional is which occurs, any symptom or vertigo happens, occurs and persists while maintaining a new static head position. And positioning means in which the nystagmus or vertigo is provoked by the act of moving head from one position to the next and eventually decays away if the new position is continuously maintained. So whenever a position is attained and maintained for longer time, it becomes positional. And if immediately when the position head position is changed, that is positioning, but the symptom should last little for a limited amount of time, then it is called as positioning. So there is a difference between these two terms, and there is a debate whether these two should be differentiated or it should be considered same. And this particular article, which was published in this particular this chapter in this book in 2010, the study group mentioned to use this term, that is static positional and dynamic positional, instead of using positional and positioning. That's very relevant to avoid the confusion. And coming to the postures and the various disorders, vestibular disorders, if we look at the recumbent posture in supine position, uh, there are certain disorders like vestibular disorders which can get triggered. But if we continuously we lie down, what happens is there are many disorders, vestibular disorders, whose symptoms resolve in lying down position. For example, if a patient has unsteadiness of gait, and lying down relieves the symptom, but there are certain disorders like BPPV in which the symptoms can get triggered while lying down. But now let us go one by one. The VOR, if the head movements, if we don't move head in the supine position, then the VOR is not activated and the vestibular symptoms are not triggered. And vestibular spinal reflex is not working, not much active in supine position. So usually, apart from BPPV, the symptoms of most of the vestibular disorders are relieved in lying down position. Now coming to the upright posture, either in sitting position or standing position or while walking, there are, for example, look at vestibulopathy. Like in vestibulopathy, if a person is sitting without head movements, so what happens for the vestibulo-ocular reflex and vestibulo-spinal reflex in sitting position? If there are head movements in the sitting position, then only a patient with vestibulopathy will feel dizzy. Patient will get head motion induced dizziness. But if a person is sitting and not moving his head, then the symptoms won't be there. There won't be any dizziness. And the vestibulospinal reflex is not very much active in sitting position as compared to the standing position. So when a person with vestibulopathy stands up, but with vision, the vision is not denied, then there is not much imbalance. But when the vision is denied, or the patient does some head movements, then there is activation of vestibulo-ocular reflex and the patient can feel dizzy. And the vestibulospinal reflex is active, and we can once we deny the vision and change the even reduce the proprioceptive inputs by using a foam pad, then we can the symptoms can be aggravated and patients can feel imbalance. And during the walking, the head movements can cause activation of vestibulo-ocular reflex, and vestibulospinal reflex is also active. So the symptoms of vestibulopathy are very commonly seen with head movements, vision denied, or with walking, especially rough surface. It can trigger the these symptoms in vestibulopathy. Then neurologic disorders specifically, they trigger they get triggered, or the imbalance is apparent when the patient is standing or walking. Even with vision, they can feel imbalance. That's how we differentiate between the neurologic disorders and proprioceptive deficit and vestibular disorders. And coming to the stance and gait, the disorders of stance and gait, when the symptoms are more in upright posture, these are the disorders of stance. And when the symptoms are more while walking, these are the gait disorders, like various neurological gait disorders. And very peculiar feature of persistent postural phobic perceptual dizziness is the symptoms are more in upright posture. As soon as the patient lies down, the symptoms are better. Then in case of hemodynamic dizziness, that is vasovagal syncope, it is specifically seen when the person stands for longer time. Vasovagal syncope can be can get triggered. Orthostatic hypotension can happen when the person is standing or walking. Especially it happens after prolonged standing. And postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome can also get triggered in upright posture. So these are the some of the etiologies which should be considered if a patient is giving history that they are having specifically the dizziness in upright posture. Then these are the some disorders to be considered. Now, orthostatic stress is present in case of sitting, but it is much more in standing position as compared to the sitting position. And while walking, the orthostatic stress is little less because because of the movements of the leg, what happens because of the contraction of the calf muscle, the venous return to the heart increases. So orthostatic stress is high in prolonged standing as compared to the walking and as compared to the sitting position. That's why there are certain disorder which specifically happen in standing position, that is vasovagal syncope. Now coming to the bending down is particular posture which is related to this aggravation of symptoms, especially in anterior canal BPPV. Bending down can lead to the aggravation of symptom. And recently I came across with very interesting case, which I will show. 40-year gentleman, he came with history of spinning vertigo lasting for seconds, only on bending down for long time, not for short time. Whenever he used to do some work, or while doing some work continuously in bending down position, he used to feel this particular spinning type of vertigo. And used to feel postural headache, like headache in that position. And after get rising up from that position, it was occipital sometimes, or sometimes holocranial. And on bending down, it was in severe intensity and lasting for a few seconds. And I did his positional testing, which was normal. So then the positional testing was normal. He was not having any anterior canal BPPV, I ruled out. Then I did his imaging, which showed this third ventricular cyst. There was neuroepithelial cyst near the third ventricle. So this was, and then I consulted neurosurgeon. I took opinion from neurosurgeon. The cyst is small and it is not obstructing the ventricle. So he advised conservative management, and but I advised the patient to avoid prolonged bending, like prolonged forward bending. And if the symptoms worsen, asked him to come back again, and then surgery can be considered. Now, whenever we look up again the anterior canal BPPV, and even the symptoms can get triggered in patients with anterior canal BPPV. If we get history that getting up from sitting or lying down position, the patient is getting dizziness, then it is called as orthostatic dizziness. And then we have discussed today various causes of orthostatic dizziness, like orthostatic hypotension, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Now coming to lying down from a sitting position, it relieves the symptoms in various disorders, but it can trigger in patients dizziness or vertigo in patients with BPPV. So in patients with posterior canal or anterior canal BPPV, the patients can get symptoms on lying down from sitting position. Again, sitting from standing position helps to relieve symptoms of in patients with who are suffering from orthostatic dizziness. Then coming to sitting up vertigo, when we sit up from lying down position, there are certain disorders specifically which can lead to vertigo. This is one article by Professor Bela Buiki, and in this particular article they have mentioned various causes of sitting up vertigo. And the causes they mentioned was typically this type 2 BPPV. They have labeled it as a type 2 BPPV. It is one of the type of subjective BPPV in which the patient specifically gets sitting up vertigo without any like nystagmus, with subjective features which are typical like BPPV, and other causes are ruled out. Vestibular migraine is also another cause of sitting up vertigo. Meniere's disease can cause vestibular schwannoma, central neurologic disorders, and phobic vertigo can also lead to sitting up vertigo. So these are the some differential diagnosis to be considered in patients with sitting up vertigo. The most common cause is subjective BPPV, that is type 2 BPPV. Now coming to this this is my data which I analyzed maybe 6 months ago. The current cases of BPPV I have is around 180. So this is typical symptoms of whenever we find typical symptoms and typical nystagmus, it is objective BPPV. And as per that article, the article which I mentioned, if there are typical symptoms of BPPV without any nystagmus, it qualifies as subjective BPPV, and which can be divided into two types. This is type 2 BPPV, in which specifically the patient gets sitting up vertigo without any nystagmus, and in lying down, also if the patient is getting vertigo without any associated nystagmus, then it is called as subjective BPPV other than type 2 BPPV, which I found in 20 patients, and only sitting up vertigo I found in 10 patients without any associated nystagmus. Then if the patients have no symptoms with typical history of BPPV, but when we plan the positional testing and there are no symptoms and no nystagmus, then it is probable BPPV spontaneously. Now, if we get a patient who tells the history that in the middle of night when they turn the turn to sides, right side or left side, they are getting symptoms of vertigo, that is positionally triggered vertigo on turning in the bed, then it is typical of lateral canal BPPV. And one important thing is in sitting position, if head turning to the right or left, there are certain differential diagnosis which should be considered when a patient gets symptoms while turning the head in upright posture to the sides. So these are, one is vestibular paroxysmia, second is rotational vertebral artery syndrome, third is CP angle tremor because of traction of vestibular nerve. It can lead to dizziness, kind of vertigo, and carotid sinus syncope because of the compression of the carotid sinus. So these are the differential diagnosis which should be considered if a patient is specifically telling vertigo and or dizziness happening on neck turning in upright posture. Now, so today we have discussed cases of hemodynamic orthostatic dizziness. We discussed case of reflex syncope, that is neurocardiogenic syncope, one patient with orthostatic hypotension, then two cases of postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and there were few cases of other causes of dizziness and vertigo. And next, in the next episode, I'm going to discuss orthostatic dizziness due to vestibular causes, neurologic causes, and psychiatric causes. I will club those particular cases which are happening especially in upright posture, and next time we will discuss those cases. So I thank all of you for attending this webinar, and Dr. Sriharsha is not there. So if there are any questions, you can put in the chat box. I will go one by one and I will answer the questions. So let me see. So if there are any questions, just put in the chat box, or you can even unmute and ask me questions. So far, there are no questions. Uh, okay. So someone has written, sir, can you give a class on BPPV only? So like in our, this is episode 10 of this Vertigo Talk series. And I think Vertigo Talks episode 2, 3, and 4, I discussed various cases of BPPV. And yes, in future, yes, we can keep a class specifically on BPPV also. We can discuss BPPV. Yeah. I think If there are no questions, I will wait for 5 minutes and thank you very much. Thank you for your interest in learning BPPV and BPPV sometime little yeah, yes, it is one of the very common cause of recurrent vertigo, and it can be confusing, especially the nystagmus. Uh, it's very important to understand the very variety of patterns of nystagmus which are seen, and it's very interesting actually to diagnose and treat BPPV. It's very rewarding. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Jagdish sir. Thank you so much for attending and for the comments. Which maneuver do you use in case of horizontal canal? Yeah. So in horizontal canal, I use earlier. I like 2 years ago. I was going with barbecue rotation, but from last 2 years, I'm using like I do Guffoni maneuver, and it works very well. In a geotropic variety, I use Buffoni maneuver. And of late, like from last 6 months, there were two cases of apogeotropic in which I used uh, this Zuma maneuver, which is very good. And please see YouTube video for Zuma maneuver for apogeotropic. And Buffoni maneuver I perform in case of geotropic. Can we see your presentation on YouTube? Yes, my all these presentations are available on YouTube. I will I will post the link of this YouTube channel. This YouTube channel, if you go in this, you have to go into Sahastra ENT Foundation on YouTube. If you type this Sahastra ENT Foundation, you will find a playlist of Vertigo Talks. There is a playlist called Vertigo Talks in this particular YouTube channel, Sahastra ENT Foundation. And in Vertigo Talks, the current, all the episodes are available, and even this episode will be available tonight or till tomorrow morning, it will be available. So all the episodes are available. And uh, someone was asking, no, Miss Dr. Jasila, she was asking about this BPPV. So you can go through my presentations like Vertigo Talks episode 2, 3, 4. I have discussed various cases of BPPV, so you can see them. And anyway, if they whenever there are interesting cases, I do present. So keep attending the Vertigo Talks, these episodes. And there is I learn so much every day whenever I see any vestibular case. Now every monthly we conduct this meeting. So in a month, whatever interesting cases I see, I present in this forum. So I'm very thankful to Dr. Sri Harsha for this opportunity. So yeah, uh, any other questions? Thank you so much, Dr. Thimaya. And yeah, it's a tough topic, and there are various disorders which can lead to dizziness and vertigo. So it's very important, like to take comprehensive history, and comprehensive examination is also important because, for example, there are several occasions where I have missed the diagnosis, and when I checked blood pressure measure, did the blood pressure measurements, then I came to know like some patients I could diagnose as postural orthostatic tachycardia or orthostatic hypotension. So it's very important. Then after you miss, when I missed such patients, Then I started to make a routine that I trained our sister staff to check this orthostatic blood pressure and heart rate measurement. And it's rewarding to diagnose these cases, and it's a very complex topic. So if we take comprehensive history and give importance to various aspects in the examination, then it's very rewarding to diagnose and treat vestibular disorders. Dr. Lee Joy, he's asking brander of exercises. Brander of exercises are habituation exercises, which are prescribed in patients with either like vestibulopathy. It works very well in patients with like triple PD. Also, it is one of the form of vestibular rehabilitation therapy. And the most important place for brander of exercise is post BPPV dizziness. 30 to 60% of patients after BPPV can develop this post BPPV dizziness, in which this habituation exercise is useful. And if you are not able to diagnose the canal properly, then also it is one of the good exercise to be taught to the patient, like in patients with resistant BPPV, or in patients in whom the canal, it's very difficult to diagnose which canal or which side is involved. These patients can be prescribed those exercises. Dr. Sleiman, thank you so much for attending the webinar. So if there are, I'll just wait for another minute and then wait for any question, and then we'll close. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee Joy. Thank you so much for attending and your valuable inputs. So there are no further questions. So I thank everyone for attending this webinar, and see you in the next webinar. Mostly I will present on non-hemodynamic causes of orthostatic dizziness. Of course, if there are any other interesting cases, I will present in that presentation. Thank you so much.